Hello and welcome to today's webinar and to the first in a series of webinars as part of the AHDB Smart Hawk campaign. My name is Grace Emily and I'm Senior Knowledge Exchange Manager at AHDB Horticulture. As many of you will know, the AHDB Smart Hawk campaign has been launched to address the wide range of issues currently being faced by UK horticultural businesses regarding labour shortages, but also issues with labour quality. Today, I'm delighted to introduce Gillian Haythorne-Waite from the Association of Labour Providers, who's going to be talking to us all about the top tips for effective recruitment. So today, Gillian's going to run through her presentation, which is going to take about 25 minutes. Then we're going to have time for some questions afterwards. Everyone who's dialed in is going to be muted throughout, but please do type your questions into the question box during the presentation, and I'll be able to ask Gillian those questions at the end, and we'll try to get through as many of those as we can. So without further ado, if I can please hand over to Gillian for her presentation today.
Thank you for that, Gracie, and delighted to be here today to talk about this very topical subject of effective recruitment. The agenda I'm going to go through today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the current labour supply and demand, both in the UK and the EU, because I think it's important to understand the context. Got some information around some ALP surveys and what people are actually saying about labour shortages, and then focus on the top tips for recruiting workers, because that's the main, obviously, subject of today. So just a little background to say who we are. The ALP is a not-for-profit specialist trade association formed in 2004. We represent recruiters, so labour providers that source and supply the workforce into UK agriculture, food manufacturing and consumer goods supply chains. And our focus really is around developing responsible recruitment practices, so about fair treatment for workers, and labour providers being able to operate legally and ethically and not to face unfair competition. So our goal is labour provision in the UK consumer goods supply chain to be recognised as a model of good practice. And we're certainly seeing with our connections across the globe that actually the UK is seen as a centre of excellence in terms of labour provision compared to quite a number of fairly large, big developed countries. So when you look at UK labour supply and demand, I think it's a really interesting picture when you look at it. 3.9% unemployment level in the UK at the moment. That's the lowest since it's been since 1974, so 45 years ago. It doesn't appear to be getting any higher. It's certainly, the trend is still downwards. There's far more people that are actually in work, but interestingly enough, over the last sort of 3 or 4 months, it's people in full-time work. After the sort of initial crash, there was a lot more people in part-time work, but that has changed over the last 3 to 6 months. The other big thing that is just the number of vacancies. There are just so many more jobs than there are people available to fill those jobs. And it's becoming obviously a big issue. It doesn't matter where you go in the country, you'll hear pretty much the same story, that there just aren't enough people around. Obviously, pre-Brexit, not going to talk a lot about that today because we'll be here for hours. Our traditional places to go and source workers was in the EU. Free movement allowed us access to lots of different countries. But as you can see from this chart, you know, I've already said UK unemployment is 3.9%, but the average for the EU is 6.5%. But if you look at some of the countries that will be familiar to you, so Poland and Romania, they are actually have a lower level of unemployment than the UK. Bulgaria is slightly higher, but not much. Really, the countries that actually where there is labour is Greece, and then places like Italy and Spain. And they are not places that we would have traditionally gone to look for labour. And obviously, you know, when we leave the EU, this route of people to come to work in the UK won't be available anymore. But you can see why this has become an issue, because not only have we got what we would classify as full employment in the UK, it is the same in pretty much all the countries we would go to recruit traditionally. They're in the same position. So they can stay at home. They don't need to come and work in the UK as they might have done in the past. So, we talk about the weather is changing, that the, labour supply is difficult. We've got full employment. There's lots of jobs. They're regular, easier, better paid work available. That bit about choice. People can choose where they want to work. The rising EU pay and work availability, so it can be a better option to stay at home. And of course, now we've got this pilot source scheme, which is the 2,500 workers that are being recruited, but they're coming from outside of the EU. And that again will be interesting to see how that works. It'll be a different way to recruit people, and I think we'll have to look at those skills and techniques to be able to bring people in through that scheme. There is a big trend at the moment, and you can see it when you talk to people, that people are returning home. So these are the people that the EU citizens that are based in this country. They live here, they work here, they may have been here for many, many years, but they are now choosing to go home. And that again is having a further impact on the labour supply and the pool of people that are available in this country. So we do regular surveys. There's another one coming out shortly, but this is the last one that has been published, which was in September last year. And as you can see, labour supply is down compared to last year. 66% of labour providers said that. Labour quality is down compared to last year, 71%. Both of those we're expecting in the new survey for it to say that it's certainly as bad as last year or could be worse. There's no indication that there's going to be anything about supply and quality being better. I think all these ones are quite interesting. We met all our clients' demands for workers in the last 3 months. That's more people were saying that they didn't meet their clients' demands. 83% short supplying. When you think it's a labour provider's business to do this, and 83% are saying they can't meet their orders. That is, a very difficult position to be in. Having to do things differently, and I think this is where this webinar comes in, that actually you just can't carry on doing the same as what you were doing before, and 92% of labour providers were saying that they're just having to do things differently. So what sort of things are happening out there? Certainly an investment in more money and resources in actually sourcing workers. That's the big thing, and it has been over the last couple of years, really since the referendum, it costs more to go and recruit workers than it did before the referendum. Increase in wages, that's starting to go up. Some workers obviously have been doing extra hours because the work isn't available. Slight improvement in the general treatment of agency workers, which again is good. So there are things that are starting to filter through about doing things in a different way. So in terms of top tips, when we've been looking at this as a subject area of what to do to recruit workers, these are the 4 topics that we've looked at that actually we believe make a difference. The first one being around labour planning, making sure you've got the right recruitment team in place, that you've got really good communications. And if you like, the recruiting workers, it's where you go to recruit, how you do it, all of those sides of it. So I'm going to go through and talk a little bit about each of these in turn. And then hopefully this will give you a flavour of the sorts of things that you should be focusing on. So the labour planning process. To me, this is actually probably the most critical one out of all of them, because traditionally, in my experience, labour users tend to be fairly poor at deciding how many workers they actually need. And it's like, I'll ring my labour provider the day before and they'll be able to send me 20, 30, 50 people or whatever the number is. And in the past, that was okay. Labour providers could do that. But in today's market, you can't do that. The workers just will not be there. And so therefore, it starts with making sure you have a really good labour planning process in place. And it's a joint thing. It's, the labour users really understanding their labour requirements, and that goes from their temporaries, their permanents. It's the whole having a total understanding. But then actually, really looking at, what type of worker do you need? What sort of shift patterns should you have? What are the skill levels? Language skills are a really big thing, because as I said, the quality I mentioned earlier, a lot of the quality comes down to the language skills. People are having to go further afield to recruit. Often you'll find if they're going into Romania, Bulgaria, or wherever, they're going into more rural areas. The education levels are not as good, and therefore the language skills are not as good. Language skills maybe even in their own country are not good, let alone obviously when you start to talk about English. But actually, most businesses would say, as a standard, everybody should have X level of English language skills. But actually, does every job need that? It might be easier to say, yes, it does. But actually, in this environment, really understanding where you absolutely have to have a level of English. But are there jobs that actually, if you do things in a slightly different way, you could actually cope with not having English language skills? So all of this is things where you've got to really think about understanding the total labour requirements, understanding what the seasonal and temporary requirements are, understanding not only the numbers, how long you'll want them for, how many guaranteed hours. There's a lot more movement towards guaranteeing at least some hours. Historically, agency workers would be on 0 hours contracts, and there's a move away from that to obviously tie these people into working for you by giving them some guarantees. And for me, it's this sort of continuous process that actually you've got to review your plan, make sure that obviously you understand your total requirements, look at the seasonals, and then go around that loop again. And I know when I'm talking, I do quite a lot of work with produce businesses, and they'll say it's very difficult to do this. You never know what the weather's going to do. The crops can come earlier and later. But the thing about this is, if you make it a very embedded process that everybody's involved and you are regularly reviewing it, you can start off with a plan for the whole harvest, but actually you can then start to sort of adjust it as the time gets nearer, you've got better information. Labour providers always are more successful when they've got more information and they've got more lead time to go and get people. They get better quality people. It also enables them to make sure that they follow the right process and a good recruitment process in order to find these people. So for me, that robust labour plan, updated regularly and communicated to the recruitment team or the labour provider, because this process doesn't just have to apply to labour providers. If you're a direct recruiter, you can go through this process yourself within your business, and it will make just as much impact as when working with a labour provider. So, big thing, have a labour planning process in place, and then really it's your team of people. I think it's about making sure that you really have good people that are recruiting. They can connect well with workers, they can find workers, they've got innovative ways of looking at things. Now, you have to decide on your route to start with, and organisations, it's about what matters to them and the way they want to do it. Some will do it directly, they'll go and recruit all their temporary workers, as well as their direct. Some will use labour providers, some will have a mix. If you're using a labour provider, you should go through a tender process, because you should make sure that you've checked the labour provider out to ensure that they are of the standard and they can do things to the standard that you require. You want to see that they've got a good caliber of recruiters. If they are going to recruit in Bulgaria or Romania or wherever, that they've got the relevant language skills. We know that actually when you're going to recruit in these countries, it is easier and you have a better process if you have people within your recruitment team who can speak the language. Recruiters should really understand the principles and particularly the compliance principles that they need to adhere to. There's lots of information around responsible recruitment and stronger together in terms of what recruiters should comply with. So making sure that if you're using a labour provider, do they understand about that and do they actually apply them? If you're doing it directly, again, have you trained your recruiters to know that and to make sure that they are complying with those principles? Big thing at the moment on everything that I seem to talk about is that to make it worker focused. Lots of recruitment processes started with the businesses thinking, I want to be more efficient, I want to do it more quickly, and I'm going to do it like this. But actually the experience for the worker was really not very good. So change it. Start to think about, from a worker perspective, if you want them to apply online, make it a simple and easy process. You don't want them to go online and think, gosh, this is hard, and then they go away and they never complete their application process because you've lost that person and they could have been a really good person. So start off and just try and think about it from the worker's point of view. And you have to do things differently. It's got to look at new and different ways of finding workers. Social media has taken off a lot over the last couple of years. Whether it's Facebook, WhatsApp, any of these types of things, going to different places. I know of organisations who go to car boot sales over the weekend, set up a stall, and people are there anyway, so that they don't have to go out of their way to talk about a job, and they've had really great success. So I think it's about looking at it differently, maybe looking at some of the harder to get at groups of people. As the ALP, we're looking at a programme called Open to Opportunity, which is at getting at these harder to get at groups of people. So I think you just got to think things differently. You can't just keep doing what you were doing before. So people who become expert and recruiters at this type of recruitment, these are the ones that are going to be the most successful. Communication. I think this is one of the things that actually is the most important thing. And to set up a structure of communication, formalise it. So if you're using a labour provider, make sure you have annual reviews. Make sure you have monthly progress reports. You'll need as it's going along, daily, weekly updates, because things change. They change all the time. And you need that process in place so that everybody knows if something changes, this is what we do. So you start with the plans. You make sure you have a review process and an update of the plans and that they're communicated. You can monitor your progress against those plans to make sure they're kept up to date. And actually, is the whole process working? Are you delivering the numbers of people against the plan? If not, why not? And what do you need to do about it? It enables that much more proactive management of this whole process, and gives you a chance to sort of say, well, actually, it's not working this. We need to think about doing things slightly differently before it becomes a really big issue. And we have seen, that in some of the labour shortages with farmers where, they just haven't had enough people and they've not been able to harvest their crops. And you obviously don't want to be in that position. So trying to do some of this stuff will enable you, hopefully, to be able to avoid that in the future. So communicate. And I always like this quote: the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that is actually taking place. I mean, how many times have we all heard somebody say, well, I told you that, but the other person didn't hear. So it is about making sure that it is heard as well. So communication must be hot, honest, open and two-way. So if there are problems, raise them. It's much better to talk about them and say, right, yeah, this is a problem. Let's make sure we have a plan, do something different. If you're not honest about things, then it's just not going to work. So recruiting workers, I've talked a little bit about some of this, but I think it's about standing back and looking at, think about the type of worker that you're wanting in your business. Draw up a picture of what they are like. Where are they likely to go? What's the sort of things, I mean, I think the car boot example is a really good example of thinking, well, the type of people that maybe like the work that I've got, they probably do go to car boot sales. So therefore, you know, if we set up shop there, you know, it's easy for them, we can have a conversation, and that's proved quite successful. If they're younger people and maybe they like social media, and that's what they do a lot, then connecting through that medium is going to be a really good way of finding them. Certainly in seasonal and produce businesses, having a proactive returner strategy is key. You know, if they're coming for the season, they're coming to actually pick whatever the crop is, and then they're generally going home, you want them to come back the following year. They've already got the skills, they're already trained. I think you've got to use lots of different sources, new and old. You've got to invest in the local country recruitment knowledge. On the ground knowledge is proving to be really successful. You've got to have multiple channels. And as I said, think about it, how do they use it? Where do workers go? What do they access? I mentioned this already, having an accessible and easy to use application process. And I think there's a mindset change here where you've got to go and sell your jobs. You know, there's so much choice out there. Why do they want to come and work for you? So they've got to really think there are some real benefits of working for you rather than somebody else. I mentioned the worker focus selection process, and I think that goes all the way through the process, right the way through to the point that they actually start working. They don't want any surprises, and they want to feel it's a very welcoming sort of process. And technology, use technology to find and connect with workers. There's lots of new technology coming out there at the moment. Use it wisely. I think sometimes it can be a barrier between yourselves and the worker, but used in the right way, it can be a really good connection and engagement tool. So the ALP sourcing workers recruitment checklist or guide, I spent quite a lot of time last year looking at all the different ways to source and recruit and retain workers. This particular guide, the Sourcing Workers Recruitment Guide, it looks at it from a labour provider point of view, a labour user point of view, as well as direct recruiters. So it's designed to cover all different types of recruitment in this process. It's available to members of the ALP. Obviously, we'd love people to join the ALP if they want to do that, but obviously people who have been on the webinar today, you can have a copy if you email me, and I will arrange for a copy to be sent to you. It's quite a big document, quite a lot of detail, but it takes you all through the practical steps to source workers more effectively, and particularly in this climate. We've also got quite a lot of other things available, both to members and non-members. So the documents, the public papers are available for everybody to read. We're very active in communicating with DEFRA, the Home Office, the EU settlement scheme, on labour supply and what it should look like in the future. We also provide a lot of expert training as well. So we run, I run a workshop on effectively sourcing and retaining workers. And we're also got some quite specialist ones. So you can see the one on the screen there, which is about using social media. Because I don't know about you, but for me, you know, the social media thing can be a bit of a mystery. So that demystifies it and enables you to be able to really understand how to use it well. There's also, for members, an effective labour planning guide as well, but I've talked to you through quite a bit of that at the moment. So there are resources available. There's also other places you can go to in terms of useful links, which you can see on the screen. The CIPD produced recruitment facts, REC, the Recruitment and Employment Confederation, they provide information, as well as ACAS and gov.uk. So I think the thing is, there is lots of information and support and help out there. You know, you just got to look for it really, and decide what will, and take it and decide how you want to use it in your business, because it's important to make it work in your business. So that was all I wanted to say today in terms of an overview of the areas where I think you should focus on to improve and be more effective in your recruitment. So we've got about 5 minutes by the looks of it. Let's for questions. So I'm assuming everybody else is still with me, but the people at AHDB are not with me. So I can't see any questions. So I apologise for that, because I would be very happy to answer some questions. I think the best thing is for you to, if you have any questions, is to email Gracie Emery at the AHDB, and we will make sure that those questions are available with answers, obviously, on their website. And it's a bit of a shame, really, because I you know, that often get asked lots of different questions around recruitment, and it's a really hard subject, and there are lots of different things. But certainly responsible recruitment, I would say, is one of those things that is people need to get to understand about responsible recruitment. There is also the responsible recruitment toolkit.org, which is useful to actually understand the sort of standards that are expected going forward. So if somebody's interested in that, that will be certainly another area to have a look at. Anyway, thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to go through all that information, and I hope you all have a fantastic bank holiday weekend, and I look forward to the next time I come to do a webinar in a couple of weeks' time. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thank you very much.